Hi, everyone. This is the editor group product design UX research sync for March 3rd, 2021. And I usually start off the meeting with a bunch of droning on and on. So I mixed up the agenda. So we'll start with Catherine in UX research.
Okay. Hi. So I just have some updates from the last time. So I ran an experiment on a proposed navigation structure, and now that I think about it, that link might actually be to the issue, not the results. But they are lower in the point. Um, and I found I came across another challenge where the overall success rate was still pretty low, but it was also pointing towards settings again. So what I'm gathering is that settings is kind of the hot spot of some issues, as well as analytics, as we saw in the previous study. But so there were some proposals that I went against as a result of this study, but I just listed some of the outcomes that I think would be good to explore. One that's interesting because I created an issue about it, but I also saw that there was one previously, is around deploy tokens. This one is slightly mystifying me um, because in both tests, less than 10% of people clicked on settings repository, which is where they currently are located. Um, the number one choice was access tokens in the first test. And so I was like, okay, well, maybe that is a result of priming, tokens and tokens, but it happened again. And so it's something that I think we should consider, but I don't have a direct answer for it because I'm not really sure where would be better for them. So that maybe you might have thoughts on that. I did find an issue where I think we had previously considered moving them to CI/CD settings, but then an issue came up around the permissions. So if pipelines were turned off, then you wouldn't be able to access these deploy tokens or something like that. So that's a challenging spot. Would appreciate some feedback there if you have any thoughts on it. But otherwise, feel free to take a look at the results of the studies. And yeah, let me just comment the link to the issue as well about moving it to CI/CD settings.
This is really good work, Catherine. I'll take a look at this over the next few days. Like, there's a lot of interesting things here, and it like dovetails really nicely into some of the left nav interaction changes that like are kind of in a good spot in my world. So yeah, out
Yeah,
of this, I'm probably going to make some like help push some of this stuff forward. Anything that's kind of obvious. The token one is kind of interesting. I'll dig in deeper because I know some other designers are looking at like consolidating some tokens in like the user settings world. So that, but
right.
so, but yeah, this one's a separate token. But yeah, cool. I'll
Yeah,
take a look at it.
it's definitely an interesting one, and it kind of showed up a little bit in even a test that I did on the doc site, which was asking where they would go to find guidance on that. And there was a good percentage of people clicking on CI/CD, and it's just it seems like it's one of those things that's on the cusp. So maybe that's another idea around multiple placements for a setting or considering the context. Um, Out of all these tests, I would definitely say that that concept of contextual access to settings was definitely strong as a result from that.
Mm.
But yeah, okay. But that is the first point. And so I actually just had a talk with Marcel, our product design manager for Create, earlier today, and he talked about some potentially a job to be done oriented approach to labels, which is basically like build, release, analyze, things like that. And we figure we'll just experiment with it and see how it goes. So my plan is to run a hybrid card sort, and what that is that you give people the categories that you're proposing. So in this case, we're going to try 4. And then you also let users create new categories if none of those apply to the item. So the idea there is to start with a small amount and see kind of what's the simplest you could go. And if people kind of do much more from there, then you know, okay, that's too simple, it's too broad. But if it actually kind of works, it might be something to move on to a tree test where we would give them tasks to complete and see how that compares to the existing structure. So that's the test that will be coming up. So if you have thoughts on that, feel free to check out the issue, leave any suggestions or concerns and things like that. I also wrote some considerations in the issue description because there's a lot that would come with this sort of change, but it's all experimental. So no need for alert or anything like that. It's an experiment. Yes. And then lastly, I am currently working on some materials to communicate findings from these various studies that have just piled up. So the first thing I'm working on is a slide deck, and then also work on a video, and probably we'll think of some other ways to communicate out the findings, considering that it touches on a lot of different stage groups and whatnot. But that is where I currently am in terms of that. Oh, and the last thing is, I forgot to add this. I completed a walkthrough of different products where I looked at their navigation design and IA. So if you're curious to see that, we'll leave a link in the description. And we talked about this, Michael, but I forgot to share it as well. And yeah, if there's any questions, feel free to ask. Otherwise, I can move on to Michael.
Please link that issue on your exploration of the competitors left nav IA. I think that's really useful for everyone here on the team to take a look at, just because a lot of the applications that you looked into are competitors, but like also like things that I never used before. So it's good to see the insides of like how they structure and how they think about organizing things. And I think by looking at that, that kind of hints at like why you're exploring these category labels for the left nav and things like that. So it's a good visual kind of like, oh, okay, cool. There's some interesting ideas here. Let's see if that might work for us. So really good work there, Catherine. Thank you.
Thank you.
So on my side, pretty short update. I made a bit of progress on the left nav interaction. So one of the challenges with our left nav was how do we solve one of the issues about removing like clicking on the titles when the popover happens. And it's a little bit tricky because our left nav allows you to click on the item as well as hovering opens a pop-up menu, and then trying to solve that in the collapsed state and expanded state, as well as being keyboard accessible, was an interesting challenge. So I think we're in a good state there that we can move ahead with some of the recommendations. And this frees me up to start looking at solution validations that are probably like a few weeks behind. So I'm going to try to make some moves on setting search in the editor, like whether we want to use blocks or some other pattern, and then some web ID research as well. So over the next week or so, I'm going to start tackling these items. Over to you, Eric.
Thanks. Yeah, I just left a note under the left nav stuff, which I think, by the way, looks fantastic. The direction you're headed with those, it's looking really good. So there was one of the issues, the jobs to be done oriented category labels issue that Catherine just mentioned, referred to this issue related to moving members out of top level nav and putting it under project, which was something that we had just kind of tossed around over the past couple months. And I know has been kind of tested and validated already. It seems like, yeah, one more single item category that we could take out and move it under the project or group level. And I was just curious if you think we should just go ahead and fold that into the work that we're planning for the left nav, or if you think that needs any further validation before we do it.
I'll take a look at the issue. Gut feel feels like if there's enough cross-team like agreement on this, there's a rationale that we can go ahead and do that. But I'll answer that later today.
Yeah, I just pinged you on the issue, so feel free to keep that async. But Catherine, did you? Looks like you have.
Yeah.
We're about to type a comment.
Yeah, so basically, I just shared this with Manage Access, so the Access group, because they have an open issue around solution validation. And in the last comment loop, they basically asked me, should we continue with this solution validation issue, or do you think that we could kind of move towards the direction that that we mentioned? And I was saying that actually, as a result of what I found in the research, we might consider two locations, of course, which would potentially be the project overview as like where you could view the members of a project, and then the settings as a place where you can manage them, manage the people, manage access, things like that. Because there was kind of a couple comments around two purposes. Like if I was doing this, kind of looking through this as a project member or a developer or someone who doesn't have maybe higher level permissions to it, then project overview might make sense. But if I wanted to manage them, settings would kind of be my more natural click. So I suggested that they explore moving it to both, like to two different locations, and see how that goes. So I'm thinking in either case, it would no longer be a top level item, but there still might be some research going around where it ends up exactly.
That makes sense. Well, it seems like then the two options are either we move it into under the project heading, project members, or we move it into project members and admin settings or something like that, and split the functionality. So if we just move forward with the assumption that it's going to be under project, then we can wait on the outcomes of that research and decide whether we need to coordinate with them on splitting the functionality of that view up or what. Because they're still going to probably be the DRI for that, the functionality of that view. I would imagine we're only moving the link, so we would want to coordinate efforts, but not necessarily adding scope to the left nav work. But thanks for letting us know about the ongoing discussion. I guess on that note, I have some notes here that I typed in. But the summary is basically we have two main tracks that are forming over the coming, let's just say quarter, 3 milestones or so, leading up to 14.0 and 14.1. And I was talking with Roman about this, and in general, I think we're aligned that there's two main priorities for the group. We'll do other work, on the side, I'm sure, but the first priority is getting the top nav consolidation effort and the left nav UI pattern UX redesign kind of work all, full steam ahead. Like I think that work's pretty much ready to start executing. And in some cases, we're already building the scaffolding for that, for the top nav. So continuing to put a lot of resources against that over the coming 3 milestones, however long it takes. And then the second path is working towards the MVC of our rich text editor component in the wiki and making sure that we have that as soon as possible so we can start validating it and extending it and testing it. So I say this with hesitancy because I don't want to set arbitrary deadlines, but I think it would be wonderful for the 14.0 release to have both of these in them, because 14.0 is a big number, it's a big milestone, big changes can come with big milestones and be maybe more widely accepted. Whereas like 14.2, we changed the top nav. There, people might be a little more surprised. I say that, but also wrote in the notes and want to say out loud, they'll ship when they're ready. And so I'm not drawing a line or setting a marketing driven deadline or something like that. But Roman and I talked about it. We felt like it was a realistic goal. We should move forward, assuming maybe both of those are landing roughly 14.0. And I'd like to start thinking about communication plans for those, both. If they were both to land, or when they both land, I should say, I think they're big enough that some kind of blog post or maybe even like a YouTube unfiltered video where we discuss the motivations, the future plans, and outline why we did it and what we hope to get out of it would be great. For the settings in Nav, I feel like that should probably be driven mostly from UX research and design, because those are primarily the motivations behind the changes. For the rich text editor, for WYSIWYG editing in general, it's a design problem, but I think it'd be really interesting to write it from maybe from a standpoint of engineering and how it's building a component that's reusable across GitLab, and what doors it might open up down the road for extensibility and things like that. That's just my take right now. I guess I'll probably want to create some issues and start having that discussion async with everybody. But I think there's probably going to be a lot of documentation to update with the navigation changes too. So I want to make sure we get ahead of that. And yeah, I don't think there's any other formal processes. Like, we're not deprecating anything or removing any functionality. So it really just be about proactively messaging and getting ahead of things, and then having somewhere we can point in the release post to a blog post or more information, whether that's on YouTube or our blog. I don't know if you have any thoughts on all that.
That is a really good point about kind of walking through the thought process behind some of the changes. I could create something that's around the issues that I've created as a result of the research, and then maybe Michael, you could do something around the interactions and maybe changes in the visual appearance and things like that.
Yeah. So I think this is actually a good ground, because last week Catherine and I were talking about some of the stuff that we're doing with settings in Nav, and how what we do affects a lot of teams, and there's a lot of moving parts. And as a group, like, from the engineering to research design, settings in Nav has been interesting in trying to figure out what to do next, or like what move is good. So this actually primed the whole like proposal for a talk and everything. So yeah, I'm happy to contribute my like angle on, yeah, you can make a lot of moves, like 3 years worth of backlog and issues. Like, how do you make a decision? So I think that was a really good story to tell there.
Yeah, I think that'd be a great perspective to write it from, and also an audience that we would need to take into account too. Is like, people are going to see this inside GitLab and most likely be the first ones to see it and say like, wait, why are you changing this? And like, what about my thing that you moved and you didn't tell me about, or whatever, like we might have forgotten to let somebody know or something. So being able to proactively communicate that in a way that can be consumed asynchronously would be great. And we had talked previously about like a group conversation, but I think since we're executing regardless, like it might just be something we can do in a recorded video or a blog post or a combination of both. Anyway, early thoughts, but I feel like, we're 2.5-ish months away from when that would be if we make 14.0. So start thinking about it now. Obviously, I'll help write whatever needs to be written if you want me to. And I know we have, counterparts in technical writing and marketing that will review and help with the blog posts and stuff. So get all those people brought in as well. my next topic is really just letting you know I didn't get around to defining those success criteria, but it is related to this like blog post. We would probably want to have clear success criteria written out. So I'll be focusing on that in the coming days, hopefully by our next meeting.
Yes, and I just wanted to put there that I think there are probably some different paths for success, considering the different types of changes that we're making. We have a overall success metric that we're starting to gather. We ran the first survey last quarter. I actually still need to report on that and like bring it all to life, pending. And then in terms of comparing success for the individual areas, I think it's useful to come up with some hypotheses for them. And that could help you determine what you need to measure. So if you're trying to say, hey, this change made it easier to go from groups to projects or something like that, you could compare the existing experience versus the proposal or the new experience and just kind of back it up with a study around that. So I would just say if you have some high-level hypotheses or just things that you want to test out, we could just list them out and then plan how we can gather the data to support it.
Yeah, thank you for those examples, and I think that's a good approach. I don't know, Michael, you're typing. I don't know if you want to voice over that or if those are just notes.
This week I just created a tracking issue around our left nav. I wouldn't say this is a success metric, but I really wanted to understand when people actually use the submenu versus just directly accessing an item. So this interaction doesn't really change with our proposed changes, but because it's like something that's in GitLab, but like I don't know how to suss it out from like just one-on-one usability session, that I feel like it needs to be something that's kind of scaled out, because testing this, people will be like, yeah, I do this sometimes, I don't do this all the time. So I think it's a bit too fuzzy to get user testing on, but I would love to understand whether people use the sub menu when the menus collapse, because there's a lot of complexity in the way we do it. And looking at like competitors, the menus are a lot simpler in interaction, as in like there's no hover. You click on something, then you see the menu. But personally, I find it's kind of useful to just hover and see things from time to time, because I don't need to click. I can just like hover and see what I need to get to. So I always thought it was a benefit or like a feature. But yeah, there can be scenarios where it can be annoying, as Chad raised, in certain cases when the UI is a little bit close together, that the hotspots are close by, and thus triggering the pop-up menu unnecessarily.
That's a good point. Also realize how little I use it in collapse state, because like I have a wide monitor, right? I don't think to collapse it all the time. Really good point. And I was curious, in the code base, are they the same link presented differently, or do we have separate actual like hrefs basic for whether it's collapsed or expanded? Would we be able to track this easily? Because I believe the navigation, I don't know if they got to the left navigation, but there's a lot of, I was just looking at the dashboard that you created a long time ago, Chad, about the actions in the top nav. I don't know if they got to the left nav items.
Do we ever even finish that?
Well, I was just looking at the raw data that you put into that dashboard. It's not a complete like report or anything, but I was just looking at the raw data. But I don't know that, like, I'm just curious, maybe we don't need to answer right now, but I'm curious if like under, I'm trying to find one that's CI/CD pipelines, when you collapse it and hover over CI/CD and choose pipelines? Is that literally the same link and we're just changing it with CSS and JavaScript? Or are we swapping out divs because, it's easier to keep those separate? I'm not sure it'd be easy to track, but it would be an interesting pattern to validate.
I have to drop off my daughter, and so I'll check up on your last point a little bit later. So bye, everyone.
Yep. Bye. Thanks. The last
Bye,
point's not
Michael.
extremely critical anyway. I was just letting everybody know that product is drafting group level OKRs for the first time. So I'm working on Q2 OKRs and making some suggestions. I don't have any written in the doc yet, but some
Right.
high level thoughts in there.
Yeah, do you have any high-level thoughts on what you might be interested in?
Yeah, so I'll share what I put in the doc, which was really just meant as a brainstorm between Michael, Roman, and I, but obviously we'll want input from everybody. This isn't something we do in isolation, but the guiding themes that we were being asked to ladder up to are driving a meaningful impact on usability, either SUS or security bugs or S1, S2 bugs. Deliver on the monetization of our product by increasing paid TMAL or other measures, other performance indicators related to monetization and paid conversion, and then capturing new product usage and increasing adoption, mostly through driving more stages used per user or per project, or per organization. My thoughts are, and I've shared this before with you, Catherine, I don't think we can actually impact and measure change in SUS in a single quarter with any kind of confidence, like a causal relationship. So I'm not going to try and, create a KR around like moving SUS by 2% or something like that. I don't think we have a area of the product that would be able to be proven to do that. And maybe there are others who can, but I that's not something I would like to hold ourselves to. I do think that dog fooding, which is an example of something that could drive an impact on usability, is an opportunity for us, especially when it comes to these underlying editing components that we're building around consolidating our code and non-code editing experiences around 2 editors. And if we can dog food them ourselves, then drive consistency in the experience that improves usability and potentially satisfaction and overall, SUS eventually, maybe. So that is something I'm thinking of. We don't have any paid features except Group Wiki, and I don't think there's any reason we should prioritize driving adoption of Group Wiki beyond organic and what we're doing already to just clean up the backend. So I don't think we'll ladder up to that KR. And I think if anything, we might find, this is probably something that Michael would want to weigh in on, but just find like a bucket of usability related issues, S1, S2 kind of things, and create an epic that we just burn through, just like a paper cut UX debt kind of effort. Try and get a dozen or 15 of them done in the quarter and just polish it up. So I think between dog fooding and, we don't need to have a huge amount of product KRs, but I think between dog fooding and polishing the UX, we could have our answer, but I'll think about this some more in regards to what we have planned for the wiki, and just thinking that this is like, this is Q2. So what could we potentially be accomplishing by the end of Q1 that we're building on for Q2?
Yeah, I think these sound good. So with the usability issues, it could be anything in editor. So it could be one of the editors, wiki, even settings in Nav, maybe?
Yeah, really any of our categories, and we might end up picking specific categories to focus on for the quarter. I mean, I would say we are not inclined to build a backlog like that on live preview or snippets because they're
Right.
fairly. I mean, snippets is maybe more strategically important, but our overall investment as a group is just not focused on that. And but I could see us doing like, let's do 10 web IDE, 10 wiki, and 10 settings in Nav, and then try and fit those all into a quarter. Or try and fit a percentage of those in a quarter. 30 issues already. That's like,
Right.
that's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Wiki could be a really good candidate because of the fact that investment in it has kind of shifted over time. There are definitely some issues I remember about Wiki in terms of improving usability.
Yeah.
And then settings too. A lot of opportunity for settings. Even in the categorization of them, I think that might be one of the biggest points alongside search and contextual access.
Yeah, I agree. Wiki, I need to think through this some more, but by nature of introducing the rich text editor and a more visual way to edit markdown files, we are tackling like a large chunk of the backlog that I've seen. I mean, there's also plenty of other work to do, but of work that is achievable, that we are like equipped to handle over the next couple quarters, I think that's probably our primary opportunity. So finding ways to polish the editing experience even further and bring those elements into the rich text editor as extensions or something like that. That could all be considered for KRs on these. So yeah.
Sounds good.
We're supposed to have the draft by Friday. I'm woefully behind on this. It's not a hard deadline, but we want to draft so that we can share with leadership and then they can start forming their OKRs. Like we're a little early on this process. So.
Right. Is there anything that would help you in terms of maybe the usability one?
I'll ping you. Just your thoughts already have been helpful. I'll ping you if there's anything specifically I need. But
Okay.
I think at this point we're looking. I think what is being asked is for higher level draft, and then we would get more specific if as they get refined. So probably in a few weeks we might be looking for some more specific details.
Sounds good.
Great. Chad, as our sole West Coast of the US engineering member and frequent visitor, do you have anything to bring up from the engineering side or any thoughts on this?
No, I just have one question. JTBD, is that job to be done?
Job to be done, yes. Sorry
Okay,
for the
doesn't
acronym.
say anything.
Jobs to
Sorry
be
for
done.
that.
It's a very producty speak. Yeah. What we're hired to do.
I had to
What
go.
the user's hiring us to do.
No, it seems like, I don't know.
In simple terms, task oriented or that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of stuff is going on. I know that the one discussion that came up in relation to like Paul and I being assigned the task to sort of create the scaffolding for the beginning of some of the top nav reorgs we do. There was a discussion around using feature flags versus using the GitLab experiment gem that Jeremy has been working on, and pinged you and Michael in the thread, and it seems like y'all are very metrics driven and are likely to want metrics and to do more than one variant and all the sorts of things that the GitLab experiment gem supports and feature flag doesn't. So it seems kind of like a no-brainer to go down that approach. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'd be more than happy to use that framework because it helps develop it as well. So I think it would be a learning experience for me. I've never
Right.
had a feature through them, but
And yeah, like when Paul and I started talking about that, the thing I kept saying over and over was like, you know, what we want here is a real feature flagging framework, something like Launch Darkly that's got all of the features that you'd want in a feature flagging framework. And if nothing else, GitLab Experiment is a lot closer to that than the built-in feature flags. So why not try it?
oh, yeah,
For
that
example, like
sounds great.
we're risk averse. We don't know how many people will get mad if we change this. Okay, the answer to that is you do an incremental percentage-based rollout, and you can't do that with the built-in, the feature flags like we use. But GitLab Experiment, which sort of is like scientist under the covers, the Ruby library, we have a lot more options to do stuff like that or implement it ourselves if we don't want to.
Yeah,
So
that's
I think
exciting.
we're going that direction, and unless there's any opposition.
I don't have any reservations. And I think that one thing, if I could just clarify, it sounded like it wasn't then tied to releases either. Like we'd be able to tweak the experiment on the fly after the code's made it into production.
I'm not sure. Maybe? I'm not sure if it's data driven. I need to find that out. And the other question that came up was like letting people opt out versus opt in. And I think the point Paul made was letting people opt out is like kind of a slippery slope. It would be
It
better
is.
to do the incremental rollout, and like if the people that are hit with the new one get upset about it, then that's, we need to roll back and revisit the decision of rather than adding yet more configuration options for people to opt in or out.
Yeah, and I went back and forth with this with Roman and probably should have taken a more firm stance, but I think the complexity that it adds to surface another configuration is probably not necessary for this feature, for this effort. We don't necessarily want people to persist this setting. Like if we do it right, we're just going to roll this out to everybody anyway. So like making them make a decision, that's the thing that gives me the most reservation on letting people opt out explicitly through the UI is like at some point we would just say like, well, sorry, sorry you don't care for it, but it is proven to be more usable and we're going this direction, right? So we would then be removing something they explicitly like wanted, and that feels a little worse than just saying like, yeah, we hear you, there's some bugs, we're iterating fast, and we're GitLab, and we're capable of changing things, and we're not afraid to roll things back. I do think putting it behind a feature flag or an experiment where we could say like, oh, actually, huge misstep, let's roll this back quickly and make sure that if there's a self-managed install that got added to the experiment, that there's a path for them to like the idea of a feature flag where we could default to on and they could just go into the console and be like, turn this thing off for now because it's completely broken and we missed a showstopper bug. That was desirable. Like that makes sense to me.
Right, which you could still do with the experiment framework.
Right. So
But
as long as we have that safety net, I think we're good.
And to the point of adding, configuration values, there's a lot of subtle downsides to that. Like not just the complexity of yet more settings that we're already trying to deal with the ones we have, but there's also the inconsistency of usage. Like it behaves differently for one person than another, and the documentation is harder, and one person tries to help another person, or like, oh, yours looks and works completely different than mine. Like consistency is important.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's a problem with experiments in general, but yeah, especially for user configurable.
But that's temporary. Like
settings.
rather than like
temporary,
permanently,
right.
You have these different cohorts of users that the app behaves differently, and they get confused when they try to help each other out.
I will say that the conclusion that I came to with Roman was maybe too risk adverse and over engineering for the purpose of a safety net, which was like we would give it an opt out, but expose that only to GitLab team members while we were doing a slow rollout, so that we didn't disrupt a workflow or slow people down as they're using GitLab to get their work done, and we're still kind of tweaking things. And then I had said I'm not committing to, and we probably shouldn't expose that to anybody else externally because of that exact reason. But I think it's probably more engineering than it's worth to expose that opt out in the UI, and instead using the experiment framework to manage that, and then being proactive about communication.
Right. So it's on my to-do list to dig in and learn more about how the experiment works. I just haven't gotten to it yet.
Cool.
I think that's it.
Yeah, that sounds super interesting. I think any way to test things and be able to opt out or be able to roll back on things would be really, really helpful for anything navigation related.
Yeah, and like to the point of, we paired on the rich text editor and testing framework today, and we're doing that all in GitLab UI. Anything that we can iterate on, without going through the full release cycle and more formal review process and stuff, uh, without incurring undue risk, but still move faster. That's a win.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. That's a good point. And I think if it works well and you get that framework set up pretty well, we could consider doing that for the left nav changes as well, depending on if that structure works.
Yeah, if we learn it and become confident with it, like that's why Jeremy added it. It's like it was just a hole. Like you want to have a feature-rich feature flagging and experimentation framework, and it's good that we do now. We should try to use it.
Definitely. Well, yeah, my full support. I've got to drop for an interview, but thanks for your time.
I didn't write any notes on any of that.
That's okay. I'll drop something in the agenda just to say that we talked about feature flags and experiments.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.